On Romelu Lukaku returning to Inter, Chelsea and Inter agreeing a deal for him to rejoin Inter next season. Gab, can you tell us more about what the deal entails and what that fee is after all?
So there is an agreement between the two clubs. He's scheduled for medical next week. Obviously, no announcement yet, but everybody pretty much confirming that the agreement's done. They kind of met in the middle, Kay. Chelsea wanted a loan fee of 10 million euros. Inter wanted to offer no more than 5 million euros. Eventually, it looks like the deal is done at 8 million euros, plus up to 2 million euros in performance related bonuses for this season. So if everything goes really well, Chelsea gets their 10 million. Obviously doesn't change the fact that, you know, this is a player whom Chelsea paid around 110 million euros for just 12 months ago. And it is just a loan deal. So in a year's time, they're going to have to figure something out. On the wages front, and I want to emphasize this because I don't know how many professionals do this. Lukaku took a big pay cut, round about 30%. In addition to that, he's going to be the beneficiary of some tax legislation. But you know, his take-home pay is still going to be around 30% less than it was at Chelsea for this one season. So obviously, he really wanted to go back to Milan.
Yeah, Tiff, he's losing out on a bit of money there. What about Chelsea? That's 100 million euros. It doesn't look like they're going to be getting back. Is the pressure going to be on Tuchel now, Gab? Because presumably he wanted this player last season, but couldn't make it work. And with new owners in, surely they'll be looking at what this all means.
Well, I mean, look, he's still a Chelsea player. He's got a 5-year deal, or he signed a 5-year deal. He's signed up through 2026. So after this season, you know, Chelsea will either take him back, agree another loan deal, or try to complete a permanent transfer with Inter. But I think it's going to be difficult because obviously Inter's financial situation not good. And of course, he's going to be 30 years old next summer. So they are going to take a big hit on it. Is Tuchel under pressure? I think you're going to hear a lot of different versions now about how Lukaku ended up back at Chelsea. And if I'm Todd Boehly, I'm going to have an inquest. I'm going to ask everybody there, starting with Tuchel, and say, hey, did you really want this guy? Were you the driver behind signing him? If so, what was your plan for him? Why did it not work out? How much of this is down to, you know, Lukaku deciding, oh, I made a mistake, let me go back to Milan? And how much of this is down to the environment? Were there other people, other forces? Obviously, Marina Granovskaya and Bruce Buck are on their way out at the club. But, you know, they do have, whether it's Director of Football Peter Cech, whether it's Scott McLaughlin, the Chief International Scout, you know, somebody greenlit this signing. The buck has to stop with somebody, and there's no question that Chelsea are going to take a huge hit on him. I mean, they're taking a huge hit just with, this is a player who's got about 22 million euros in amortization per season. So they're going to take a big hit on him, you know, regardless, even with that 8 plus 2 million loan fee this season. But if you're Todd Boehly, you want to figure out exactly what happened and try to apportion accountability here.
What do you think, Frank? Should Tuchel be taking some of the blame for this situation?
Not 100% of it. I would say he's responsible for picking him up, of course, choosing him. But I think Lukaku also didn't really want to come. I think Inter wanted to get rid of him because of the 113 million euros, if I say correctly. And I think everybody is a little bit guilty about that. But that's the football that we see now, where 100 million euros seems to be nothing in the world of football. It's like $100 for us, and you spend it, and if it doesn't work, it's okay, you get rid of it, and it's not really a problem. We see that with so many transfer fees. We see that with so many salaries for some players who don't perform, and it's like it's not a big deal. It is a big deal when you bet on somebody for 130 million, you give 22 million pounds per month on wage. You should expect some results. And yes, Tuchel is responsible because he picked him, but I guess the more responsible of all is Lukaku, because he didn't perform the way everybody was expecting him to do. I'm sad for him because I think he's a great guy, he's a great player, but it wasn't a good season. It was a disaster. And I don't know if him going back to Inter for a season is going to resolve the problem within a year.
Frank, Ale, you're a new owner at Chelsea. You're coming in, you're looking at what's happened the previous season. Are you going to be reluctant to give Tuchel the money that he wants to rebuild some of that squad after what's happened here?
Well, I think on paper you can make that argument, but what I would say is that Todd Boehly would be reluctant to give any of us the money. All of us would have said, yes, what a great signing Lukaku is going to be for Chelsea. This is the player that they needed in order to have goal-scoring consistency. A player that could provide that presence inside the 18-yard box that could potentially be the difference. This was the conversation going on ahead of the season. Could potentially be the difference between Chelsea being a real contender against Manchester City and Liverpool or not. That he was going to be that guy. And we all agreed back then and said, you know what? We really think Lukaku is going to have a tremendous impact on this team. He's going to be productive. He's going to score goals. And it didn't happen. And so all of us were wrong. Not only Thomas Tuchel, all of us were wrong. And I think at some point, and this is where I wholeheartedly agree with Frank, while we like to focus on the sporting director, we like to focus on the manager, we like to focus on all the things in and around the organization that brought Lukaku in, I think at some point we have to focus on the guy who's actually on the field, and that is Romelu Lukaku. Lukaku! Yes, Lukaku. We have to focus on him and say, you know what? He did not adapt to the idea that he didn't have a manager that put an arm around his shoulder and said, Romelu, you're my guy. You're my guy and you will forever be my guy. I love you. I trust you. You're going to be out there regardless because you're so critically important for us. No, you had a manager who said, well, if you're not scoring goals, you're going to sit on the bench. And if you're not going to do the work, you're going to sit on the bench. Lukaku didn't like that, didn't respond to it, and in the end, Chelsea found another way to score goals, and that's why Lukaku was going back to Inter.
Do you agree with that, Shaka?
I do. Listen, first of all, I think Gab is absolutely right. First step is to have an inquest and ask the questions as to who sanctioned this and try to figure out exactly why it went as wrong as it did. Just looking from the outside, I don't put much of that blame on Thomas Tuchel. I think as much as I was very critical of Thomas Tuchel and how he handled the fallout around that interview that Romelu Lukaku did, I think he could have handled better, Thomas Tuchel. The purchase of Romelu Lukaku for just about everybody in the game seemed like a good one. I'm sure there were some dissenting voices, but those were in a very small minority. So you have to ask, why did it then go as wrong as it did? Things started well. It seemed Chelsea had all the pieces in place to service Lukaku in a way that would see him score the kind of goals that he did in Italy. But then the injury came and nothing just seemed to click. So while you have that inquest, I think you then have to focus around that injury, his comeback. But ultimately, I think a lot of that responsibility falls to the player himself. Because I just don't think he lived up to his own expectation.
Just to go back to what you were saying as well, Gab, with Granovskaya and Buck out, we're also seeing, maybe it was just some of the wording in some of the reports, but it got brought up yesterday that it was Todd Boehly making Raheem Sterling a transfer target. Now, we'll get to Sterling in just a moment, but it's the fact that it said Todd Boehly. Is he wanting to have a part and a say in who comes in?
I mean, look, ultimately, he leads the consortium that owns the club. I don't imagine Todd Boehly, makes technical decisions with the LA Dodgers. I don't see why he would suddenly start making them here. So it could just be something that, I've heard of Raheem Sterling. Yeah, great player. Let's see if it's doable. I don't think we need to, until we have more information, we can't say like, look, Todd Boehly's making the football decisions. I don't think that's accurate. But I do think though, he's going to now need to appoint somebody to replace Marina Granovskaya. It was absolutely essential. And I think he has to make a decision on the people who took Lukaku to the club because, yeah, a lot of people thought it was a good move if you were going to take your record signing and put him in conditions to be effective, to be the most effective player he can be. And yes, there were certainly injuries. There was a system that clearly didn't suit him with no wingers and playing up front on his own when he had produced so well in a front two. And then you need to ask, why was that decision taken? How much were the injuries part of the problem? And how much of it was down to Lukaku? Personally, these are all answers that Todd Boehly wants. And frankly, I'm glad that there is an owner who seems to be taking an interest and wants answers here, because so often we have faraway owners who, put their trust in the football folk, who are people who don't have skin in the game because it's not their money, and they go and they make decisions with somebody else's money, and they make bad decisions, and they seem to stick around forever. So if this was a bad decision, and by all accounts it was, let's figure out what went wrong.
And let's talk about some decisions as well, Gab, because that's a busy summer ahead of them. Who replaces Lukaku? Who are they looking at to bring in?
That's the $1 million question, because obviously, sure, you can say Kai Havertz is the first choice center forward. You still need somebody to back him up. Chelsea really like Armando Broja, who obviously was on loan at Southampton last year. He's also somebody that they can monetize because he's got offers from other clubs as well. But this is still a very young player who's only started a handful of games in the Premier League. Is that enough as a backup? I don't know. Could you be looking at, you have so many attacking players. Could you be looking at some sort of, Manchester City type strikerless system where they all kind of move around? Could you go back to Werner through the middle? Could you try Pulisic in that role? Maybe. There are a lot of options there. I do not believe, or certainly I think it would be unwise of Chelsea to go out and spend another 70, 80 million on some sort of top drawer center forward until you've sorted out your defense, where you've already lost 2 free agents, and you could well lose Azpilicueta as well. You need people back there. Midfield as well, where obviously you're a player down, and Conte and Jorginho aren't getting any younger. It seems that there's a whole bunch of other areas which are also priorities, and then probably also shifting some players out, get some money back, and then you can reinvest in the team. One other point in all this, which I think has been missed, is Todd Boehly. It's emerged, the Times reporting that he withheld something like £100 million out of the agreed £2.5 billion sale price, and reportedly this was in case there are unforeseen penalties for violating financial fair plays, whether UEFA's or the Premier League's. Now it all makes a lot of sense because they're taking a big hit on Lukaku, and I don't see how they won't be at risk of balancing the books unless they manage to shift some players and do so for a considerable price.
And if they can do that, is Robert Lewandowski, Gab, a player that they could be looking at to bring in?
Again, Robert Lewandowski is the kind of player you bring in if you want to win here and now. We know all about all the difficulties Barcelona are going to have to sign him. And also you've got a very stubborn Bayern as well, who are saying, no, you're going to see out your contract. So I don't think that's going to be an easy deal to make. I think it's going to be very expensive in terms of wages. If Chelsea want to do that and try to win straight away, sure. But then, you're going to have Lukaku. You've got the real risk of Lukaku coming back and being on the books on Lewandowski type money for the next 3 years. And then you've just spent, 15, 20, 25 million on a guy, on a center forward who's turning 33. If on top of that, you need to balance your books and bring in players in other positions, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how it all makes sense. Again, unless you're going to find people to give you 80, 100 million for Ziyech or Pulisic or guys like that, or Hudson-Odoi or whatever.
Who would you like to see come in, Frank, to replace Romelu Lukaku?
No one. I think that's not the priority of Chelsea. I think if you want to do the front pages, you can talk about Lewandowski, you can talk about Sterling, and some other Class A players. But as Gab said, you have to look elsewhere in the positioning. You need central defenders. I want to talk about Koundé. I want to talk about a right back. I want to talk maybe somebody in the midfield zone, in the middle of the park. You know, according to Conte fitness last year, how Jorginho is gonna handle the season as well. It's where they have to look for. They've been seeking for the best top scorer for 2 years. It never worked. They have talented players that they have to settle in, that they have to put and give confidence to. But I think it's not the priority for Chelsea to find a striker, like it wasn't a priority for Real Madrid to sign Mbappe. They signed Rudiger. That was clever. That's a clever signing. I want to see Chelsea having clever signings as well and stop, focusing on getting in the front page because of signing a striker, which is not clearly a priority because they have the players there that they signed last year and 2 years ago.
I think Mbappe might well have been a priority, though, Frank, at Real Madrid, but didn't work out for them in the end. With what Frank's saying there, would you agree that it's not a priority to look at replacing Lukaku at Chelsea right now?
No, there are more positions that need more urgent attention, but it's not my money. So I'll plump for Lewandowski all day long. I'm all right with it. Listen, I understand exactly what Gab is saying, and to that point, Chelsea are a very different football club under very different ownership that we will see how that pans out than they were 12 months ago under Abramovich, when you knew what he was going to spend, you knew how he was going to run that football club. It's a very different place now. So we really need to see who Chelsea are and who they show themselves to be. But if you're talking strikers, particularly strikers who are available, you want to come in and do a job, even if it's in the short term, a very good job in the short term. I don't think you look much further than Robert Lewandowski.
In this so-called inquest that Toboli is making and talking about the mistake that was Romelu Lukaku, one of the first questions that I would ask, if indeed I own this club, is, wait a minute, you mean to tell me we paid this money for this guy, and even though he had a tough season, we can't find a way to make it work, so we have to loan him out to some other team that he's still under contract, but it wasn't going to work for us? Why couldn't we make this work? If we thought that this was the guy, why can we not make it work? I know it's a tough season. What makes it so difficult to make it work in the future? If he stays healthy, if he's confident, is he not the same player that he was a year ago prior to this transfer? So instead of looking into spending money on Robert Lewandowski, why not improving what you already have in your team? Instead, that guy's walking out the door, and now you're trying to figure out answers. Good luck with that.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN+.